All right, let's get right into it. For years, right, the headlines have been all about the US-China tariff war. But what if all of that was just a distraction from a much, much bigger power play? The title here, Chinese Check, kind of hints at a long strategic game. We're going to unpack how this whole conflict was way less about tariffs and way more about a fundamental rewrite of the global economic rulebook. And boom, right out of the gate, we get to the core idea. Sure, an uneasy truce was eventually called, but as this quote says, that truce laid bare a structural inversion of power. What does that mean? It means this wasn't just some trade spat. It was the moment the world was forced to see a completely new reality. So that's the big question we're really tackling, isn't it? If we look past all the noise, past the day-to-day headlines, what was the real game being played? What actually happened here? Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll pull back the curtain on the tariff war illusion and see why the numbers didn't tell the whole story. Then we'll get into the unequal pain and how each side dealt with the fallout. From there, we'll get to the main event, how the leverage completely shifted. And finally, we'll zoom out to see the long game, what we're calling a 30-year checkmate. Okay, first up, the tariff war illusion. This is all about how it looked like a straightforward win on paper was actually hiding something much, much deeper. So here's the big number that got everyone talking. On the surface, it looked fantastic for the US. The trade deficit with China? It narrowed by a massive 30%. A clear victory, right? Well, not so fast. Because the reality is, that big win, it was basically a magic trick. The deficit didn't really disappear, it just changed its clothes and showed up somewhere else. And this explains exactly how it worked. It's kind of like a three-step shuffle. Step 1, the US slaps tariffs on Chinese goods to make them more expensive. Step 2, global supply chains, which are incredibly smart, don't just give up. They find a workaround, they reroute. And step 3, the same stuff, or at least the key parts, still end up in the US, just with a different made-in label, coming through countries like Mexico and Vietnam. The factory was still running, just the final shipping address changed. So if the tariffs didn't really change where things were made, who did they actually affect? Well, that brings us to our next section. Unequal pain, different plans. Because this whole thing wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, it had a real impact on real people. And that pain was definitely not shared equally. So who really felt the squeeze? Well, on the US side, China's response was surgical. Their retaliatory tariffs went right for the Farm Belt. This hit rural communities and it hit them hard. The US government tried to soften the blow with temporary subsidies, which was really just a short-term fix. Meanwhile, in China, the pain was concentrated in big export cities like Guangdong. But the difference, and this is crucial, is that Beijing had a long-term plan to absorb that shock, not just put a Band-Aid on it.
And that plan has a name, the dual circulation strategy. Now, it sounds complex, but think of it like an economic shock absorber for a car. The idea was to make China's economy stronger from the inside out by boosting their own domestic market. So if demand from other countries dropped off, they could rely on their own citizens to buy things and keep the economy humming. It made them way more resilient.
And this, right here, brings us to the absolute core of this whole story, the leverage shift. The trade war wasn't really about who sold more soybeans. It exposed a fundamental change in who actually holds the power. We've moved from an era of consumer power to an era of producer control. Let's just break down this structural inversion. For decades, the old leverage was simple. The US had the biggest consumer market. We were the world's #1 customer, and that gave us all the power. But the new leverage, that belongs to China. By becoming the world's factory, the balance has totally flipped. Now, the power isn't just in buying the final product, it's in controlling every single piece that goes into making it. So where does this new leverage actually come from? Well, it's not about putting the final touches on a smartphone anymore. It's about controlling the entire recipe. We're talking about intermediate goods, the little chips, screens, and components inside everything. It's about their rapid rise in high-end tech. And maybe most important of all, it's about their near-total control over the critical rare earth minerals that our entire modern world runs on. And the thing is, this didn't just happen. It wasn't an accident. This was a plan, decades in the making. And that brings us to our final section, a 30-year checkmate. To really get it, you have to zoom way out and see the difference between China's long-term vision and the West's short-term political cycles. This timeline really shows you how it was a slow, patient burn. It all started back in the 80s with those first market reforms. Then, through the 2000s, they became the world's workshop, weaving themselves into every supply chain imaginable. And now, here in the 2020s, we're seeing the payoff. They are asserting that industrial dominance. This was a 30-year project, and it's all coming together. And this slide, wow, this just lays it all bare, doesn't it? On one side, you have the United States, operating on these ill-suited 4-year political rhythms. Priorities change, plans get thrown out with every election. On the other side, you have China. They don't think in terms of 4 years. They plan in decades. They can set a goal and just drive towards it, with a focus that's almost impossible in a democracy.
So, if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Building real, lasting dominance is a 30-year project. It is not a 4-year tariff cycle. The trade war wasn't the main event. It was just the alarm bell, the moment that finally made everyone look up at the board and realize the game had already changed. And the real question now is, what's the next move?